Whispers of a Forbidden Love. In the heart of 12th century Paris, beneath the cloisters of Notre Dame and within the walls of the cathedral school, a story began that would echo across the centuries, not as a tale of kings or conquests, but as a whispered chronicle of forbidden love, of passion and pain, inked in letters and sealed in sorrow. Theirs was not a love born of frivolity, nor one nurtured in simplicity. It was forged in the fires of intellect, sharpened by defiance, and ultimately sanctified by suffering. It would come to haunt the annals of medieval Europe, not because it ended in joy, but because it survived in words, enduring long after bodies turned to dust. Peter Abelard was not a man born to anonymity. By the early 1100s, he had already distinguished himself as one of the most brilliant minds of his age, a philosopher, theologian, and logician whose fame outshone that of many nobles. Crowds gathered wherever he lectured, eager to grasp even a thread of his insights. He was in essence the rock star of the Latin schools, his name spoken with reverence and envy alike. Yet even the most luminous mind can be undone by the pull of the human heart. She, Eloise, was not his student, at least not at first. She was something far rarer, a woman whose intelligence rivaled any man of her time, and whose reputation for learning defied the rigid expectations of medieval womanhood. Fluent in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, versed in classical literature and theology, Eloise was as formidable in debate as she was graceful in presence. Her uncle, Fulbert, a canon of the cathedral, took pride in her brilliance and guarded it fiercely. He knew the world was not made for women like her, and perhaps he feared what would happen if she were allowed to shine too brightly. Abelard, for all his arrogance and ambition, saw in Eloise not just a rare mind, but a soul that mirrored his own. He convinced Fulbert to let him live in their household under the guise of tutoring her, promising to aid her education and safeguard her virtue. It was a lie draped in scholarly robes, for both of them understood that something more was unfolding, a slow, dangerous dance of glances, of pauses too long between words, of conversations that veered from logic to longing. Their love did not ignite in a single moment, as some romantic tales claim. It was not born of chance, nor did it explode with reckless abandon. It crept upon them quiet as twilight, filling the spaces between their lessons, slipping into the margins of manuscripts, hiding behind Latin verses and theological disputations. In a world where courtly love was performed like theatre, and marriages arranged like treaties, theirs was something subversive, intimate, real, but passion is no friend to discretion. Soon whispers began to trail after them, students murmuring in the corners, servants exchanging knowing looks. Even Fulbert, ever watchful, could not remain blind, but by the time suspicion hardened into truth, it was too late. Abelard and Eloise had already surrendered themselves to love, to lust, to longing. Their trysts became more daring, more frequent. Letters passed in secret. Lips met in shadows, and the line between sin and salvation blurred. Abelard, the great rationalist, tried to frame their love within the bounds of philosophy. In his mind, desire was not an obstacle to virtue, but a path through which human nature could be understood. Eloise, in turn, did not shrink from their affair, but embraced it with boldness. She rejected the notion of marriage, calling it a trap for women and a prison for love. Her thoughts were radical, dangerous even. She wrote later that she never loved Abelard for God's sake, but for his own, for the brilliance of his mind, the fire in his soul. It was this refusal to conform that made their love so threatening. Not just to Fulbert, who saw his niece's virtue slipping through his fingers, but to a society that demanded silence from its women and restraint from its scholars. Their defiance was a scandal wrapped in parchment, whispered through cloisters, discussed in taverns and condemned from pulpits. Then came the moment that sealed their fate. Eloise, barely in her 20s, became pregnant. The news could not be hidden. Abelard, desperate to shield her from the fallout, took her to his sister's home in Brittany, where she gave birth to a son they named Astrolabe, a name plucked from the stars, fitting for a child born of celestial minds entangled in earthly peril. But the birth did not bring safety. If anything, it deepened the betrayal in Fulbert's eyes. To atone, Abelard offered to marry Heloise in secret. She resisted at first, fearing it would ruin his career and reduce their love to a social contract. Eventually she agreed, not for herself, but for him. They married under cover of night, witnessed only by a few. Yet rumours spread like wildfire, and Fulbert, burning with rage, revealed the union in hopes of forcing Abelard to acknowledge it publicly. When Heloise denied the marriage to protect Abelard's name, Fulbert saw it as the ultimate insult. In his eyes, she had been seduced and discarded. What followed was not just revenge, it was an act of medieval brutality. In the dead of night, a group of men stormed Abelard's chambers and castrated him. The scholar whose words had once commanded kings was left broken, bleeding, humiliated. It was not merely a crime, it was a silencing, a warning to any who would defy the moral order of the age. Abelard, crippled and disgraced, took refuge in a monastery. Eloise, torn from her child and her lover, was forced into the convent at Argenteuil, where she took the veil, not out of piety, but out of obedience, duty, and despair. They had loved too freely, too fiercely, and now they would be separated not by death, but by vows that mocked the very passion that once bound them. But if the world could strip them of their bodies, it could not steal their words. Their letters, heartbreaking, luminous, raw, would become the lifeblood of their enduring legacy. In those missives written years later, they wrestled with their choices, questioned their faith, and relived their joy and sorrow. Eloise's voice, especially, rang out with clarity and courage, unafraid to challenge doctrine or expose her pain. Their love story, born in the whispering corridors of Paris, was no longer just theirs. It became a mirror to every forbidden touch, every hidden kiss, every soul that dared to love beyond the boundaries drawn by church, family, or fate. Abelard and Eloise were being punished for their defiance, yet in their suffering they immortalized the idea that love, even when crushed, even when denied, can echo through time with a voice louder than any sermon, more enduring than any law. And so it begins, not with triumph or tragedy, but with a whisper of love scribbled between lines of Latin, echoing down the centuries, reminding us that even in the darkest ages, the human heart sought light. The philosopher of Paris, before he became the lover entangled in one of history's most tragic romances, Peter Abelard was already a legend in his own right, a man whose intellect burned so brightly that it cast both admiration and envy in equal measure across the scholarly world of medieval Europe. To understand how his love for Eloise shattered walls and defied the order of the time, we must first journey through the corridors of his mind into the heart of the man hailed as the philosopher of Paris. Abelard was born around the year 1079 in Le Palais, a small village in Brittany, into a noble but relatively obscure family. He was the eldest son, and according to tradition, that would have meant inheriting land, wielding a sword, and managing the family estate. But Peter rejected this path. He turned away from the sword and chose the pen. From a young age, he showed an insatiable thirst for learning and an independent spirit that would come to define his every action. He travelled from town to town like a wandering scholar in search of wisdom, challenging masters and studying under the great minds of the time. By the time he reached Paris, the beating intellectual heart of Christendom, he had already begun carving a name for himself. He enrolled at the Notre Dame Cathedral School, one of the premier centres of theological and philosophical learning, and studied under the venerable William of Champeaux, a leading realist in the scholastic debate of universals. But Abelard was not content to merely absorb knowledge. He was an intellectual rebel, questioning, probing, challenging every assumption laid before him. In lectures, he would openly dispute William's teachings, exposing weaknesses in his logic and proposing bolder, more nuanced alternatives. These confrontations were not mere classroom disagreements. They were public spectacles, intellectual duels that drew crowds and stirred controversy. Eventually, the tension between master and student grew unbearable. Abelard left William's tutelage but didn't slink away in defeat. He founded his own school on Mont Sainte-Geneviève, just across the Seine. There, students flocked to him in droves. His charisma, eloquence, and razor-sharp logic made his lectures legendary. The man who once challenged authority was now its new embodiment. By his early 30s, Abelard had eclipsed even his former teachers in fame. His reputation spread across Europe. Kings and bishops sought his counsel. Students would leave their homes and travel for weeks just to hear his teachings. He debated questions that pierced the heart of theology, the nature of universals, the relationship between reason and faith, and the very essence of God's will. He was not content to regurgitate received truths. He demanded proof, logic, coherence, a rare stance in a time when questioning doctrine was considered dangerous. In 1121, he published Sic et Non, Yes and No, a groundbreaking work that compiled conflicting statements from church fathers on hundreds of theological issues. But Abelard did not offer definitive answers. Instead, he encouraged readers to engage with the contradictions, to think critically, to reconcile apparent opposites through reason. It was revolutionary. It laid the foundation for the scholastic method and transformed the way theology was taught in Europe. Yet with brilliance came controversy. Abelard's intellectual arrogance earned him bitter rivals. Many theologians accused him of heresy, of placing reason above faith, of corrupting students with his ideas. His confrontations with Bernard of Clairvaux, the powerful Cistercian monk, would later become legendary. To Bernard, Abelard was a dangerous innovator, a man who dared to humanize divine mystery. But even before that fateful clash, the seeds of conflict had already been sown. Abelard's personal life was as uncompromising as his academic pursuits. He was known for his pride, perhaps his greatest flaw, and his unshakable belief in the power of intellect. He did not court favor with the church nor curry the approval of the powerful. He followed his own path, often to his own detriment. But beneath the armor of logic and disputation, there was something more. A restless soul, a man capable of profound emotion, longing not just to understand the universe, but to be understood within it. He was not content with abstract truths. He sought connection, intimacy, something no theorem could provide. And it was this unspoken yearning that would lead him to Heloise. In the early 1100s, Abelard returned to Paris to teach at the Cathedral School of Notre Dame, now the centre of theological learning. There he became a canon, a cleric and scholar held in high esteem. It was around this time that his path crossed with that of Heloise. She was already known in certain intellectual circles. Her intelligence and eloquence whispered about among students and scholars alike. Abelard, always drawn to brilliance, saw in her not just a student, but a kindred spirit. Her knowledge of classical literature, her passion for philosophy, her fierce independence, all of it captivated him. She was in many ways a reflection of himself, and yet entirely other, a woman who thrived in a world that had no place for her kind. It was as if the universe had conspired to bring them together, not as teacher and pupil, but as two forces destined to collide. At first he approached her through formal channels, requesting to become her tutor. Her uncle, Fulbert, eager to enhance her education, agreed. Abelard moved into their home under the pretense of instruction, but his motives were not purely academic. In his autobiographical work, Historia Calamitatum, the story of my misfortunes, Abelard confessed that he sought Heloise not for scholarly pursuits, but for love. It was a dangerous admission, and one that would haunt them both. Their lessons quickly transformed into something else: conversations steeped in poetry, laughter, glances held too long, the slow, burning intimacy of shared ideas. In Heloise, Abelard found a student unlike any other. She did not merely absorb his teachings, she challenged him, argued with him, inspired him. The line between instruction and seduction began to blur. Their intellectual connection soon gave way to physical desire. What began as admiration became obsession. Abelard, once the master of logic, found himself enslaved by emotion. He would later write that love drew us both more irresistibly than the lure of learning. Their affair blossomed in secret, hidden beneath the robes of academic propriety, concealed behind Latin manuscripts and theological commentaries. But in time, as all hidden things do, the truth began to surface. Whispers turned into rumours. Fulbert, suspicious and enraged, accused Abelard of corrupting his niece. The affair that began with philosophy would end in scandal, in blood, and in eternal separation. But that would come later. For now, in this segment of time, we see Abelard at his peak, the philosopher of Paris standing atop the world he had conquered with his mind, unaware that love would soon be the force to bring it crashing down. In the story of Abelard and Heloise, intellect and emotion were never truly separate. Their love did not defy reason. It was born from it, shaped by it, and ultimately undone by it. Abelard's mind may have built the walls of their world, but it was his heart that dared to tear them down. A dangerous passion. In the cloistered world of medieval Paris, where church bells governed time and silence was the language of discipline, the passion between Peter Abelard and Heloise was not merely unusual, it was incendiary. This was not the perfumed courtly love of troubadours, or the pious affection written in illuminated manuscripts. It was something far more dangerous, raw, and subversive. Their love was a challenge to a world defined by control, hierarchy, and chastity. It was a rebellion wrapped in tenderness, a storm cloaked in the quiet folds of ink and parchment. Once Abelard had moved into Fulbert's household, the facade of student and tutor quickly became unsustainable. The lines between academic instruction and emotional intimacy dissolved with an alarming swiftness. As Heloise listened to Abelard's lectures on ethics and the divine, her heart beat not for the abstractions of God, but for the man who spoke them. Abelard, for all his logical prowess, found himself trapped in something he could neither explain nor resist. They became increasingly careless, lingering touches, private moments stolen behind doors once used for study. The household began to notice, but love made them arrogant, and that arrogance made them vulnerable. In his autobiographical account, Historia Calamitatum, Abelard wrote with astonishing candour, describing how our desires left no stage of love untried. His phrasing was more than poetic. It was confessional, even damning. What they shared was not chaste affection. It was physical, ferocious, and deeply human. They revelled in each other with a freedom unthinkable for their time. They made love in quiet rooms beneath candlelight, sometimes even in the very spaces where lessons were meant to be taught. Abelard's students would enter to find their teacher distracted, eyes glowing with a new fire. He no longer spoke as the dispassionate philosopher. His words were tinged with longing, his thoughts fragmented by Heloise's presence. But this passion, for all its beauty, was fundamentally unstable. It was constructed on secrecy, on deception, and most dangerously, on defiance. Fulbert, Heloise's uncle and guardian, began to suspect. At first, he interpreted Abelard's attention as mere admiration for Heloise's intellect, but suspicion hardened into certainty as whispers reached his ears, from servants, neighbours, and students too observant for their own good. By the time Fulbert confronted Abelard, the truth could no longer be denied, but instead of retreating, the lovers doubled down. Abelard, ever the strategist, proposed an escape. When Heloise became pregnant, a secret they could hide no longer, he spirited her away to Brittany, to his sister's home, where she gave birth to their son. They named him Astrolabe, after the celestial instrument used to read the stars. It was a name full of ambition and meaning, a child born not just from love, but from the minds of two people who believed their union transcended the mundane. But the birth of a child did not quell the storm. In fact, it made their situation even more precarious. In an effort to appease Fulbert and secure Heloise's reputation, Abelard offered marriage. But Heloise, always more radical than her lover, resisted. To her, marriage was a trap. She wrote later that wives were the property of their husbands, reduced to obedience, silenced by social expectations. Love, she believed, should be free from the contracts and consequences of marriage. She feared what marriage would do to Abelard's future, to his name, to the very freedom that had allowed them to love so wildly. Still, Abelard insisted. He could not bear the thought of Heloise's name drag through the mud, nor could he stomach Fulbert's growing rage. The two were married in secret, without ceremony, without joy. It was not a celebration. It was a concession to the world they had tried so hard to defy. But secrecy has a way of unraveling, and Fulbert, feeling betrayed by the hidden union and Heloise's continued denial of it, exploded with fury. He wanted justice, or perhaps revenge. He began to spread word of the marriage, forcing Abelard into an impossible position. What followed was not an argument or a lawsuit. It was medieval justice at its most brutal. One night, as Abelard slept, a group of armed men broke into his chamber. Under Fulbert's orders, they seized him and performed an act of horrific violence. They castrated him, a punishment meant not only to wound but to humiliate. Abelard, the brilliant philosopher, the seducer, the defiant mind of Paris, was mutilated, not just physically, but symbolically. His manhood, his pride, his agency, all were stripped from him in a single savage act. The trauma was total. Word of the assault spread like wildfire. Paris was aghast, not because love had been punished, but because it had dared to exist in the first place. Abelard, disgraced and broken, withdrew from public life. He sought refuge in the monastery of Saint-Denis, hoping to bury his pain beneath the layers of silence and scripture. Héloïse, now a mother and a wife in name only, was forced into the convent at Argenteuil. She did not take the veil out of faith, but out of despair. She obeyed Abelard's request, choosing the cold embrace of the cloister over the fire that once defined her life. Their passion, once dangerous and defiant, had been extinguished by force. The world could not tolerate what they represented, a love that defied social order, that questioned the sanctity of marriage, that placed emotional truth above institutional control. Abelard and Héloïse had not simply broken rules, they had reimagined what it meant to love, and for that they were punished. But the fire between them was not truly extinguished. It smouldered in the ashes, waiting for years to pass, before words could once again bridge the chasm. In letters exchanged years later, they would reflect not just on the pain, but on the love itself, how it shaped them, ruined them, and ultimately immortalized them. Abelard, now a monk, would try to rationalize what had happened, framing their passion as a mistake, a test of God's will. Héloïse, ever honest, refused to repent. She confessed that she still loved him, that she could not turn her heart toward God when it still belonged to him. What made their passion so dangerous was not simply its sexual nature, nor its intellectual equality. It was that they loved freely, authentically, without the permission of society or the church. In an age where control was sacred, that kind of freedom was blasphemy. And yet, in that freedom they found a truth that transcended their suffering. Their story became a mirror, reflecting not just their time, but every time, every moment when love dares to challenge authority, to speak when silence is demanded, to burn even when the world tries to drown it. Secrets and sins. After the brutal reckoning that tore their physical bond apart, the world seemed to expect Peter Abelard and Héloïse to fade quietly into the background. He, disfigured and humiliated, cloistered behind monastery walls. She, cloaked in a nun's habit, stripped of worldly passion and resigned to silence. The expectation was that their love would be buried, just like countless forbidden affairs under layers of guilt, doctrine, and time. But Abelard and Héloïse were never made for silence. Their separation did not end their story, it deepened it. Stripped of the ability to be physically present with one another, they turned to the one medium left to them: letters. And in those letters, something extraordinary happened. Their passion transformed. No longer tethered to the immediacy of flesh or the intoxication of physical contact, their love took on a new form, one of brutal introspection, confession, and unflinching memory. It became more dangerous, more honest, and perhaps more enduring. The letters they exchanged would come to be known as some of the most intimate and haunting correspondences in medieval history. These were not superficial notes of affection or pious reflections of saints. They were raw. They were human. They were saturated with longing, regret, and a strange defiance of fate. Through these words, Abelard and Heloise gave the world a glimpse into the complexities of love, sin, and the aching space between what was and what could never be again. Heloise's voice in particular rings across the centuries with a clarity that is nothing short of astonishing. She refused to conform to the role of a repentant sinner. Her love for Abelard was not a youthful mistake to be buried in shame. No, she claimed it. She told him, in no uncertain terms, that her heart still burned for him, that she remembered every touch, every whispered promise, every stolen moment. God is my witness, she wrote, that if Augustus, emperor of the whole world, thought fit to honour me with marriage, and conferred all the power and riches of the earth upon me, it would be dearer and more honourable to me to be called not his empress but your whore. These were not the words of a woman broken by convent walls. These were the words of a soul still tethered to the memory of an unquenchable fire. Heloise did not ask for forgiveness. She demanded understanding. She wanted to know why Abelard had made her take the veil, why he had chosen public redemption over private loyalty, why, after all they had shared, she was left to suffer in the silence of holy vows. Yet the letters also reveal something more subtle and more damning. Neither of them ever truly repented, not in the way the church demanded. They may have gone through the motions, monastic life, public humility, spiritual allegiances, but in their hearts they kept their love alive. That, in itself, was their great sin. They had not stopped loving. Worse, they had not stopped wanting. Even amid scripture and prayer, memories of desire haunted them. For Heloise, the veil did not bring peace. It brought torment. She confessed that the chants of the liturgy often transported her back to nights in Abelard's arms, that even in the quiet of her cell, she heard his voice more clearly than the psalms. She struggled with God because she could not feel what she was supposed to feel. Her faith was intellectual, her submission mechanical. Her heart still belonged to a man. To her, this was not just a sin. It was a wound that would not heal. In this contradiction, Heloise becomes a mirror for countless souls across history. Her struggle is not with vice, but with truth. She does not seek to deny her past, but to understand how she is to live with it in a world that demands erasure. Her love was not impure. It was merely inconvenient to the world that expected women to feel less, want less, be less. Abelard, for all his philosophical training, is less brave in the face of this emotional onslaught. He hides behind doctrine. He speaks of spiritual love, of divine purpose, of the punishment he endures as proof of God's plan. But even he cannot keep the mask on completely. He tells Heloise that her letters move him deeply, that he too dreams of what they once had, that he hears her voice above the choir and sees her face in his prayers. Though he wears a monk's robe, he is still a man tormented by what he lost. The sin, then, is not the love itself. It is the refusal of the world to allow such love to exist outside its narrow bounds. Their sin was daring to feel something that could not be controlled, categorized, or cleansed. The secrecy of their relationship only intensified its sanctity in their eyes. They had made a temple of their shared moments. moments the world would rather they forget. But the secrecy came with a cost. Abelard's mutilation was only the beginning. His reputation suffered. While he continued to write and engage in theological debates, he was often attacked, both intellectually and personally. He moved from monastery to monastery, always in conflict, always under suspicion. His brilliance, once admired, was now treated as dangerous. Heresy was a charge that hovered around him like a shadow, and Héloïse, she remained abbess of the Paraclete, a convent he had once entrusted to her, living a life of external calm and internal chaos. Their love letters became their last form of intimacy. Through them, they revisited every corner of their past, not just with nostalgia, but with philosophical rigor. They dissected love, faith, power, and memory. Their correspondence is not simply a record of a romance. It is a theological and psychological exploration of what it means to desire in a world that insists you must not. Over time, the tone of the letters began to change. The raw anguish gave way to reflection. The pleas turned into meditations. Still, the undercurrent of longing never faded. Even as they aged, even as they became symbols of piety to the outside world, their inner lives remained illuminated by the fire of their secret. And that, perhaps, is the ultimate sin they committed. To feel deeply and remember honestly in a world that preferred forgetfulness. The Church would have preferred that they disappear into their respective robes quietly, dutifully. But instead they wrote. They confessed to each other what they could not confess to God, that their love was never truly renounced, that even amid prayers and psalms the memory of each other was more sacred than anything in the liturgy, that secrets kept them alive, that sins gave them meaning. They were, in the end, not martyrs of love, but survivors of it, and their letters, miraculously preserved through the centuries, remain as testimony not only to their sin, but to their truth, a truth so personal, so passionate, that it could only be written in secret, and only understood by those who have dared to love with the same dangerous abandon. The price of scandal. There is a cost to passion that defies the accepted order, and Peter Abelard and Héloïse paid it with interest. Their affair was never just a love story, it was a public scandal that unraveled lives, reputations, and institutions. In a world where conformity was safety and silence was survival, they chose defiance. And for that, they became the cautionary tale, the whispered example in classrooms and cloisters of what happens when desire outweighs discretion. By the time their affair became public knowledge, it was already too late to contain the fire. Abelard, once the most celebrated philosopher and theologian in Paris, had become a pariah to many. His intellectual boldness, which had won him fame and influence, now made him dangerous. He had challenged too many conventions, questioned too many doctrines, and worst of all, he had committed the most visible sin a scholar could in the 12th century. He had seduced the niece of one of the Church's own. It was not just Héloïse's honour that was questioned, it was the honour of the Church itself. Fulbert, her uncle, had not simply been betrayed as a guardian, he had been humiliated as a representative of ecclesiastical authority, and in medieval society, such dishonour demanded revenge. That revenge came in the form of one of the most brutal punishments imaginable, the castration of Abelard. But this act of violence was more than just retribution. It was a message to every monk, every teacher, every student who might one day be tempted to blur the lines between sacred duty and carnal desire. It said, "We will not only shame you, we will unmake you." For Abelard, the implications of this mutilation were enormous. In a world where manhood was measured not only by intellect but by virility, he was now considered less than whole. His enemies called it divine justice. His allies, fewer and fewer with each passing day, called it a tragedy. Abelard himself, in his later writings, referred to it as a turning point, the moment when God finally punished him for the pride that had ruled his life. In a sense, Abelard retreated into the very thing that had made him powerful, his mind. Physically broken, he turned entirely to scholarship and spiritual reflection. He composed theological treatises that would ignite controversy for generations. He dissected logic, morality, and the nature of sin with razor-sharp precision. But even his theological writings were tinged with bitterness and loneliness. He had lost more than his physical strength. He had lost a future with Eloise. He had lost the possibility of being a husband, a father in the fullest sense, a free man. And Eloise? The price of scandal fell heavily upon her shoulders as well, though in a different, quieter way. Her name became synonymous with shame, her brilliance overshadowed by the fall that had defined her in the eyes of others. No longer Fulbert's pride or the star pupil of Notre Dame, she was sequestered away to the convent of Argenteuil, then later to the Paraclete, where Abelard would make her abbess. The act of taking the veil, which the Church praised as penance, was, for Eloise, a slow erasure. She did not enter religious life out of calling, but out of coercion, a necessary veil to cover the scandal, an escape plan authored by Abelard himself. While Abelard claimed this was for her protection, Eloise saw it differently. In her letters, she makes clear that her entry into the convent was not an act of faith, but a sacrifice made for Abelard's sake, and that wound ran deep. The world had turned its gaze on them, and now it demanded they vanish. The scandal that once made them infamous now demanded silence, submission, and a kind of living death. Eloise bore the habit, attended the prayers, led the sisters, but her heart was not cloistered. Her thoughts, as she often wrote to Abelard, wandered endlessly back to him, to the life they might have had if not for the betrayal and violence that tore them apart. But scandal has a strange way of immortalizing its subjects. Rather than being forgotten, Abelard and Heloise became icons, not of love, but of transgression. Students whispered their names in the halls of monastic schools. Lovers invoked them in poems, warning of the dangers of unchecked passion. The Church used them as examples of moral failure, while romanticists, centuries later, would hold them up as martyrs of love. It's important to understand that the scandal was not only personal, it was philosophical and theological. Abelard had already been controversial before his affair with Eloise, pushing the boundaries of acceptable theology with his rationalist approach. He argued that intent mattered more than consequence, that faith should be grounded in reason. His enemies had been circling him long before Fulbert's hired thug struck in the night. The affair merely gave them the opening they needed to destroy him. He was accused of heresy multiple times, his works condemned by church councils. The scandal of his personal life only added fuel to the fire of theological suspicion. His association with Eloise, the letters that emerged later, the rumours of secret meetings, all of it made him look less like a reformer and more like a seducer wrapped in monk's robes. But Abelard was nothing if not resilient. Even as the institutions around him tried to erase his influence, he found ways to publish, to teach, to lead. He founded schools in exile, drew students from across Europe, and mentored future intellectuals who would carry forward his ideas. He refused to disappear, though the scandal never left his shadow. Eloise, meanwhile, began carving out a quieter form of resistance. As abbess of the Paraclete, she cultivated a community of learning and spiritual rigor. Her leadership became legendary. Women under her care were not just passive nuns, but thinkers, readers, writers. Eloise built something lasting out of the ruins of her past, a spiritual and intellectual haven in a world that offered women little of either. Still, her letters to Abelard reveal that the past never released its grip. She questioned not just the choices they made, but the very structures that demanded those choices. Why was love a sin? Why was desire something to be punished and not celebrated? Why must women always bear the heavier burden of male decisions? In one letter, she writes, "I would rather be your mistress than the wife of a king." This was not a woman broken by scandal. This was a woman who saw clearly the injustice of a world that punished her for wanting, for loving, for choosing a man who, in the end, had chosen his own salvation over their shared life. And yet, the scandal never ended. Even in their later years, long after the violent days had passed, the memory of their affair coloured everything they did. Abelard, in one of his final writings, Historia Calamitatum, offers a personal account of his life. Framed as confession, but laced with self-justification, he tells his side of the story, casting himself as both victim and penitent. Eloise, in turn, responds not with bitterness, but with unwavering truth. She loved him still, in ways that defied doctrine, in defiance of the very church they both served. So what truly was the price of scandal? It was the loss of freedom, the weight of public judgment, the reconfiguration of identity. It was the violent rupture between two souls who once shared everything. It was exile from society, from their own dreams, from each other. But it was also something else. It was immortality. For while the church sought to suppress their story, it could not silence it. The letters survived, the legend endured, and in their words, the scandal lives on, not as shame, but as testament, not as sin, but as the cost of loving without permission. In the end, the scandal did not destroy them, it revealed them. It exposed the fragility of power, the cruelty of institutions, and the resilience of the human heart. Abelard and Eloise are not remembered because they were perfect. They are remembered because they dared, and that, in a world of silence, remains the most scandalous act of all. A legacy etched in ink. The story of Abelard and Heloise is one that has persisted through the ages, transcending time, place, and circumstance. Their love, though tragic and filled with sorrow, has become immortalized in the annals of history, largely due to the written word. Their letters, filled with emotion, philosophy, and a profound sense of longing, have allowed future generations to peer into the hearts and minds of two individuals whose bond defied the expectations of their time. The legacy they left behind, though not one of marital bliss or worldly success, is instead a testament to the enduring power of love, intellect, and the written word. The legacy of Abelard and Eloise is primarily preserved in their letters. These letters, written over a span of years, are not merely historical documents, but living expressions of the inner lives of two extraordinary people. They reveal the depth of their emotions, their intellectual struggles, and the personal torment they both faced in the aftermath of their separation. Their correspondence is not simply a collection of romantic musings, but a dialogue between two brilliant minds, each grappling with the questions of faith, love, and destiny. The letters between Abelard and Heloise are perhaps some of the most emotionally raw and intellectually complex letters ever written in the medieval period. Through these letters, we come to understand the nature of their relationship, not just as lovers but as intellectual equals. They debated philosophy, theology, and the nature of God's will in ways that were unprecedented for a man and a woman in the 12th century. Their correspondence provides us with a rare and intimate glimpse into a time when intellectual and spiritual discourse was not just for monks and scholars, but also for passionate lovers who sought meaning in everything, including each other's minds. What is perhaps most striking about these letters is their emotional complexity. Heloise, despite her deep love for Abelard, expressed not only her longing for him but also her sorrow at the course their lives had taken. She questioned the justice of the world that had torn them apart, and yet she remained devoted to Abelard, even in their separation. She was a woman who had given her life to the man she loved, but she had also given her life to God, and the duality of her existence is reflected in her writing. Abelard, for his part, also expressed his deep sorrow and regret over the events that had led to their separation. His letters were filled with a mixture of theological reflection and personal emotion. He too struggled with the idea of their separation, and he tried to reconcile his love for Heloise with his monastic vows. Unlike Heloise, who had been forced into the convent by external circumstances, Abelard had chosen the monastic life, and this choice brought its own set of burdens. Yet, despite his vows, he could not rid himself of the love he felt for her. Their letters speak of this conflict, the tension between the demands of faith and the pull of love. The impact of their letters, however, extends beyond just the personal. Their correspondence became a touchstone for later generations, a model for intellectual and emotional expression. Their ability to balance love with intellectual debate, devotion with passion, was revolutionary. They were not simply a pair of star-crossed lovers, but two individuals who sought truth in the complexities of their emotions and their beliefs. Their letters became an intellectual legacy that has inspired countless thinkers, philosophers, and writers throughout history. In many ways, their written words represent a form of defiance. The love they shared was not accepted by the religious and societal norms of their time, but they left behind something that could not be destroyed or repressed: their thoughts, their love, their questions about the nature of existence and the divine. Through their words, they carved a place for themselves in history, a place that could not be erased by the church, by society, or by the passing of time. Their legacy is not only in the content of their letters, but in the way their love story has been remembered and retold. The narrative of Abelard and Heloise has become a symbol of forbidden love, intellectual partnership, and the power of written expression. Their story has been passed down through generations, inspiring countless adaptations, retellings, and artistic expressions. It has been immortalized in plays, novels, films, and poetry, each generation finding its own interpretation of their love and tragedy. But there is more to their legacy than just the romanticized version of their story. Their lives, and especially their correspondence, offer a profound meditation on the nature of sacrifice, devotion, and the human spirit. The love between Abelard and Heloise was never a simple affair. It was a love marked by complexity, by intellectual fervor, by spiritual yearning, and by the harsh realities of their time. It was a love that required great personal sacrifice and caused great emotional suffering, yet it was also a love that could never be extinguished. Their ability to continue to communicate, to continue to love one another despite the physical and emotional distance between them, is a testament to the endurance of the human heart. In the context of their time, Abelard and Heloise's relationship was revolutionary. It challenged the conventions of society, religion, and the expectations of men and women in their era. They were both intellectuals, both passionate about the pursuit of knowledge, and they saw each other not just as lovers but as equals. This was a radical notion in the 12th century, a time when women were generally not encouraged to engage in the intellectual pursuits that Abelard and Heloise shared. Heloise, however, was a woman of extraordinary intellect, and her relationship with Abelard was one of mutual respect and admiration for each other's minds. Their correspondence also reflects a unique approach to faith. While many in their time accepted the doctrines of the Church without question, Abelard and Heloise questioned, debated, and sought understanding in ways that few others dared to. Their letters are filled with theological discussions, and while some of these discussions might seem abstract to modern readers, they were groundbreaking at the time. They were not simply accepting the answers that had been handed down to them. They were grappling with the deeper questions of existence, of God's will, and of human destiny. In many ways, their relationship was a model of intellectual and emotional honesty. They were not afraid to confront their feelings, their doubts, and their regrets. They laid bare their souls to one another in a way that was rare for any couple, let alone a couple separated by religious vows and the constraints of their time. Through their letters, they expressed not only their love, but their struggles, their fears, and their hopes for the future. For Heloise, the legacy she left behind was not only in the love she shared with Abelard, but in the strength she showed in the face of adversity. She was a woman who was forced into a life she had not chosen, but she remained true to herself, to her intellect, and to the love she had for Abelard. Her role as an abbess and scholar in her own right added another layer to her legacy. She became a woman who, despite the pain she had endured, was respected for her intellect and her leadership. Her letters to Abelard reveal a woman who was not just a lover but a thinker, a leader, and a survivor. For Abelard, his legacy was similarly complex. While he was known as a brilliant philosopher and theologian, his love for Heloise and the events surrounding their relationship added an emotional depth to his life's work. His philosophy was often tied to his personal experiences, and his love for Heloise played a significant role in shaping his thinking. Despite the personal turmoil he faced, Abelard continued to be a major figure in medieval philosophy, and his legacy has endured in the centuries since. Ultimately, the legacy of Abelard and Heloise is one that transcends time and space. It is a legacy that continues to inspire, to provoke thought, and to remind us of the complexities of love, faith, and intellectual pursuit. Their story is not just one of tragedy, it is also one of resilience, of passion, of questioning the world around them, and of leaving behind something that could not be erased. Their letters, their love, and their intellectual partnership have become a testament to the enduring power of human connection. They may have been torn apart by the forces of their time, but in their writings, in their legacy, they have remained together. Their story is one that continues to echo through history, not just as a tale of forbidden love, but as a reminder of the power of the written word to immortalize those who dare to love, to think, and to question the world around them. Eternal love, from tomb to timelessness. The tale of Abelard and Eloise, though rooted in tragedy, has endured across centuries, defying the passage of time and the changing tides of history. Their love, though cut short by external forces and societal constraints, lives on through their letters, their legacy, and the profound impact they left on the world. The final chapter of their story is not just one of separation and sorrow, but one of transcendence, as their love, forged in the crucible of hardship, was immortalized through their final resting places and the stories that continue to be told about them. In the year 1142, Abelard, the brilliant philosopher and theologian, passed away, leaving behind a body of work that would influence centuries of thought. He was buried in the Abbey of Saint-Marcel in Chalon-sur-Saône, a place of significance for him and his life's work. However, his final resting place was not meant to be his ultimate connection to Eloise. Despite the years that had passed since their separation, and despite the distance that had grown between them both physically and emotionally, the bond they shared would transcend even death. Several years after Abelard's death, Heloise, now an abbess and leader of her own convent, passed away in 1664. She too was buried in the same abbey where Abelard lay, their bodies reunited in death. It is said that their final resting places were not only a testament to their love, but also a symbol of the eternal connection they shared, a love that had endured the trials of life and the constraints of society. The story of their tombs has become legendary. Over time, the grave of Abelard and Heloise has become a pilgrimage site for lovers, intellectuals, and those who are drawn to the story of their forbidden and eternal love. Visitors come from all over the world to see the tombs where the two lovers lie side by side, their names carved into the stone as a testament to the endurance of their love. Though centuries have passed since their deaths, their tomb has become a place of reverence, where the echoes of their love continue to resonate. The tomb itself is a simple yet poignant structure, surrounded by the quiet of the graveyard and the serene atmosphere of the abbey. It is a place where the past and present meet, where the love of two individuals long gone continues to inspire and evoke deep emotions in those who stand before it. The graves of Abelard and Eloise are not just physical markers of death, but symbols of the way in which love can transcend time and space. Though they were separated in life by forces beyond their control, in death they are reunited, their love enduring beyond the grave. The idea of eternal love is a powerful one, and it is one that Abelard and Eloise's story embodies fully. Despite the physical distance between them, despite the years that separated them, their love remained intact, unbroken by the forces of time. Their letters, filled with passion, intellect, and deep affection, were not mere words on a page, but a reflection of the profound connection they shared, a connection that, even in death, could not be severed. Their love, immortalized in their letters and their tombs, has become a symbol of the idea that love does not end with death. While many love stories are forgotten with time, the love between Abelard and Eloise has only grown stronger in the centuries that have passed. Their story has inspired poets, artists, and writers, and their names are forever etched in the annals of history as one of the most famous love stories ever told. Their love, once seen as a forbidden passion, has now become a timeless and universal symbol of the power of the human heart to love without bounds, to endure without limit, and to transcend even the harshest of realities. The story of Abelard and Heloise has transcended its historical context, becoming a metaphor for the enduring nature of love itself. It speaks to the way in which love can survive trials, tribulations, and separation. Their love was not just a romantic or fleeting emotion, it was a deep intellectual and spiritual bond that persisted in the face of hardship and suffering. It was a love that defined their lives and shaped their legacies, and it is a love that continues to shape the way we view love and sacrifice today. The letters they exchanged, filled with philosophical musings and deep reflections on their relationship, have ensured that their love story lives on. These letters were not just expressions of love, but profound works of intellectual and emotional exploration. They tackled issues of faith, philosophy, and human nature, and through these letters they were able to communicate with one another in ways that transcended the physical world. They created a record of their relationship that was not bound by time or space, a record that would outlast them both and continue to inspire generations of readers in the centuries since their deaths. The love story of Abelard and Heloise has continued to resonate with audiences around the world. It has been retold in countless forms: books, plays, movies, and poems, each new interpretation breathing life into their enduring legacy. Their story is not one of simple romantic love, but one of intellectual partnership, emotional depth, and personal sacrifice. It is a love that is not bound by the constraints of time, place, or social expectation, but one that exists beyond the physical world in the realm of memory, longing, and eternal connection. The story of their love reminds us that even in the darkest of times, love can shine brightly. It teaches us that love is not always easy or free from suffering, but that it is worth fighting for, worth remembering, and worth celebrating. It reminds us that love, when it is true, does not die with the body but lives on in the hearts and minds of those who remember it. Abelard and Eloise's love story is a testament to the idea that love is eternal, that it transcends the boundaries of time, space, and even death itself. Their love, which began in the heart of medieval Europe, has become a universal symbol of the power of love to endure and to defy the forces that seek to break it. From their letters to their tomb, their legacy lives on, reminding us that love is, indeed, eternal.